So welcome. This is I'm Saskia. I'm the publicist and event coordinator at Granta, and today I get to be lucky enough to moderate one of our last two events of a sort of 15-city tour, I think, with not just Vinicius, Jatobá, and Cristhiano, Aguiar, and Katrina Dodson, but about six other writers and translators from the Brazilian issue. So I'm very excited to be in San Francisco. This is an event that's sort of co-hosted by the Center for the Art of Translation, who've put out an annual anthology called Two Lines, and this year the subtitle is Passageways.
Yeah, Passageways.
And in this edition, they've done a special kind of supplement of contemporary Brazilian writing, with quite a heavy crossover of translators in both the Granta edition and, in crossover with the Granta edition, Stefan Tobler, Daniel Hahn, who was the consultant translator for this edition, also was one of the co-editors of that. So it's today, if you want to know about Brazilian literature, this will be when you get introduced to many of the country's sort of brightest new lights. So the Granta edition, the Best of Young Brazilian Novelists, introduces 20 of the sort of brightest lights coming out of Brazil, and it was chosen by our Brazilian counterpart. We have a Granta in Portuguese, is a sort of, how often they come out? Twice a year? Once a year?
Yes, twice a year.
Twice a year in Portuguese with their own editors from the publishing house Aguiar. And they had 7 judges pick the 20 best young Brazilian novelists under 40. And we've brought this issue out in partnership with them, with support from the Biblioteca Nacional and the Brazilian embassies. So today we have, as I mentioned, Cristhiano, who is a visiting researcher at UC Berkeley. And the thing that strikes me most about your biography is that you were an editor at an experimental, at least one experimental lit journal.
Yeah, one experimental literary magazine, and the other one was much more something like a pop magazine.
Okay.
Yeah, and each edition was made by a different designer. Yeah, so yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I wish I could see them. I've been curious about them since I read.
Yeah, I can give you guys the link, because we have some of these editions of the pop one, the experimental pop one magazine in the internet. I can.
Oh wow.
Yeah, you can ask him.
Oh, okay. So we must ask him after.
Yeah.
And so you are mainly known as an essayist and a critic in Brazil, and you are at the early stages of your fiction writing career.
Yes.
You've had one collection published in 2006.
Yeah, and another short stories published in indie magazines or indie blogs. I don't know. I'm not really well known in the whole Brazil. I was really much more known in the northeast part of Brazil.
Okay.
As an essayist. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And my fiction writing is really in the beginnings, and I'm starting this year here in California. I'm really working my first novel.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, and so Vinicius is also you're a very well-established literary critic in Brazil. You've been a critic for about a decade, and this is, you've had stories published, but this is sort of the story you've published that was chosen for inclusion here. This is kind of, I'm getting the impression it's sort of your big breakthrough.
Yes, for sure. I think this changed a little the perception of me as literary critic and writer now, because people. As I just published in anthologies, something like 5 anthologies, they were kind of, they didn't have they didn't saw me as a writer, but as a literary critic that sometimes publishes fiction.
Okay.
And now I think that people are really curious to see what I have kept in my drawer. You know? So next year I'll publish my first book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
So let's see what happens. But as you told me, I really kind of, not well known, but he read reviews by me. So I publish in really big newspapers. So everyone that really looks for reading literary supplements knows or had read once or twice, something that I wrote, so it's really the case.
Fantastic. And so, finally, we have Katrina Dodson, who's a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley in comparative literature, and you're doing your PhD on Elizabeth Bishop and Clarice Lispector, right?
And writing also about the Brazilian modernists. So a movement called the Cannibalist movement.
Sounds kind of scary.
It's meant to be.
And so you worked you translated Vanessa Barbara and Emilia Fraia's pieces for this collection, right?
Yes, so I actually met them at a literary festival, the festival where Granta in Portuguese was launched, in Paraty, and they co-wrote a novel that I'm also going to be reading part of tonight. And so I just met them at this literary festival, liked what I heard. I went to a reading, and we talked and we started a correspondence. And so I just started translating their novel on my own for fun, and we were all three of us working on it together. And then, and then all of a sudden, I mean, that was in 2008, and I'm still writing a dissertation, so things come and go. So I just left it behind, and then last year I went to Brazil on a Fulbright fellowship. And I think it just got me back into the rhythm of Portuguese and thinking about Brazilian literature, contemporary Brazilian literature. And so suddenly they both managed to have stories selected for Granta. And I mean, it's a little bit circuitous, but Daniel Hahn, like you said, he was the fiction editor for Passageways. And so someone from McSweeney's passed on part of this novel I've been translating to them, got in there, and then he was the one that recommended me for Granta. So it's just this whole like accidental circuit.
Yeah, I get the impression that the sort of Brazilian literature scene, both in Brazil and just from watching, you travel through London and kind of interact with the universities there with Brazilian specialties and whatnot, that it's a really tight community that has a lot of, there's so much attention being focused on Brazil from, the upcoming Olympics, but also culturally. And I kind of wonder, just before you read, if you, wanted to say a few words about where you see yourself writing and kind of the tradition of Brazilian literature. I want to ask you specifically, because you had mentioned writing about the suburbs was something that you're very focused on, but that it's kind of a marginalized topic. So did you feel, I guess, how would you introduce your work?
I think that people have perceptions about Brazil, and from places like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Salvador, that are really well established. So when you think about Rio de Janeiro, you think about Copacabana, the beach, and Bossa Nova, maybe samba, but samba from carnival. And I come from a place that is suburbs, that's really not represented in literature, in terms of human values and art, and just, I think that when it shows up in chronicles and short stories, it's just stereotypes, even for people from Rio de Janeiro. So I think that my fiction has faced some difficulties, that struggle between what people think suburbs is, because it's really well represented in samba lyrics and some really strong and I can say narrow and not deep images of what suburb is, and what I try to do, which is just write about suburbs that I know and that I grew up there. So for me it's natural. There's nothing really political about writing about the suburbs. Just that my great parents and my parents were from there. I heard stories, I write about what I know, but I really kind of try to don't give up to the stereotypes, to try to sell the suburbs in a really way that people expect the suburb to be represented. So I think that's really kind of unusual to have a short story like this about the suburbs, because it's easier to but a guy, a kid playing soccer in the street with a samba here. That's what people expect to come from this place. So I was really happy when Granta selected this short story in particular, because it was a really well criticized short story by editors that told me that I was overcomplicated, pretty simple people, and I really can't understand that. So
Shall we have a listen?
What?
Can we hear your story?
What?
Can you read?
Yeah, can you read? Yeah.
So we're going to do a short reading in Portuguese, and then would you like me to read the English version?
Of course.
Okay.